Hello, my name is Michael Bazemore, and I am a student in the Master of Arts in Teaching program at North Carolina State University, concentrating in secondary social studies. Welcome to my brief webinar about this wonderful, useful book, Reading, Thinking, and Writing About History, written by Chauncey Monte-Sano, Susan de la Paz, and Mark Felton, all veteran teacher educators from the University of Michigan, the University of Maryland, and San Jose State University, respectively. The book is published by Teachers College Press and can be purchased at all the usual outlets. The overall purpose of this book is to help teachers help their students become better writers and thinkers through the practice of history. Essential to this is preparing students to undertake historical investigations, which are key to teaching students how to read and how to think historically. Of course, in this era of high-stakes testing, there needs to be an end that is served by conducting historical investigations, especially because they are so time-consuming in the classroom. Ideally, the skill itself is its own reward, but practically the authors hope to help teachers implement the literacy and inquiry goals of Common Core and of the C3 framework, both of which are rigorous and demanding, but which provide little by way of direct guidance for teachers. Their model is what the authors call a cognitive apprenticeship, which they describe as both an instructional model that teachers use to organize the learning environment, and an approach to learning that helps students see the process involved in learning activities. Finally, they also attempt to provide classroom-tested, concrete examples of the sorts of inquiries that they encourage. Studying history presents students with specific literacy demands, most especially the demands of disciplinary literacy, which highlights specific ways of reading, writing, and thinking that are characteristic of history as a discipline. Since the hallmark of historical practice is argumentation, the goal of the assignments included in the book is to teach argument writing through structured learning opportunities. These opportunities have been tested and refined in actual classroom situations, and the included materials can serve as a model for creating further inquiries, as well as structured approaches to improving evidence-based argumentation. Finally, to prepare students to read, think, and write historically, these materials integrate background knowledge and methods of evaluating sources through historical analysis and literary practices. The authors note that Common Core and C3 set a high bar for students and for teachers by requiring the integration of primary source texts into the classroom. Through contextualization, sourcing, and evaluation, students are supposed to master basic argumentative writing, a noble goal that will certainly serve students well, as the C3 has it, in college, career, and civic life. However, neither Common Core nor C3 explain how teachers can achieve these literacy goals. This is where this book comes in. To accomplish this goal, the authors posit three foundational concepts. The first is history as evidence-based interpretation. Common Core and C3 both seek to move teachers away from rote memorization of names and dates, and this book aims to be instrumental in doing so. Students, when asked how they know something about history, should be able to respond, because that's what the evidence points to, rather than, because the teacher said so. Students learn history by doing the work of historians, which is to say by reading primary sources, considering their trustworthiness, and making arguments based on these. Second is that students learn best through analysis and questioning. Again, sourcing and contextualization are key. The authors have explicit requirements of the Common Core in mind here, such as citing specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary sources, determining the central argument of primary or secondary sources, defining words or phrases used in the text, and identifying how an author's point of view comes across in the text. Finally is the idea that reading, thinking, and writing are interconnected. They describe these as three different aspects of the same activity, and that by teaching students to think and write historically, we will teach them to be better writers and therefore better thinkers. The fact that we need to teach this literacy and approach shows that it does not come naturally, at least not to all students. The primary challenge in this is properly organizing the learning environment, which the authors see unfolding in a 5-stage process, a process in which the teacher is further shifted away from the center as time progresses. Stage 1 is preparing students to learn, primarily through setting goals for each lesson and placing these goals within the framework of historical inquiry. The authors suggest using I read or H2W, how to write, as a framework for how students will approach the material. This lays out for them explicitly the expectations of the inquiry. Stage 2 is modeling how to read and write like a historian. In this stage, the teacher models how the inquiry will proceed in class. Since this is a performance endeavor of sorts, the best preparation, according to the authors, is to actually complete the investigation and then to rehearse the presentation ahead of time. They also suggest to come up with plans that are just slightly beyond students' current performance levels, but are not completely out of reach. At each juncture, teachers should walk students through the thinking process. In Stage 3, teachers are asked to support students' practice. Part of this is simply making students aware of your presence and availability as frustrations arise. Teachers also support practice, again, by modeling behavior, for instance, walking students as a class through the first document in an inquiry, and then inviting them to begin working on their own with subsequent documents. Stage 4 challenges students to take inquiry further, encouraging them to question one another, encouraging them to argue with one another, and trying to get students with opposing viewpoints to help each other sharpen their arguments through repeated question and response. The overall goal is to promote student independence. By this stage, teachers are familiar with the strengths and weaknesses of student work and are positioned to guide, not lead, students to do better. The teacher fades into the background, still doing the work of planning and presentation and preparation, but not occupying the center stage. Beyond the model they propose, authors provide a variety of support materials, including 6 full inquiries that are ready to use in class. In this, the text is a sort of black box or turnkey solution, ready-made for United States history to 1877. The structure of the lessons is similar in that they offer a historical background, a summary of the literacy practices students will learn, primary source documents, advice for teaching, sample student responses, and lesson plans to be used. There are blank worksheets that can be copied or downloaded. These investigations provide useful examples for teachers to scaffold different skills throughout the semester, and the inquiries increase in complexity and student independence as they progress. The final chapter is all about assessing the outcomes of the inquiry process, including samples of actual student work and rubrics, and concluding with suggestions for moving forward. As a teacher, I expect it will take time to fully integrate these practices into a classroom, but there are some quick takeaways that I can begin using immediately. The first is to focus on the importance of modeling in all tasks. It has been so long since I was a high school student that it's easy to forget how difficult it can be to learn new skills. I have never been averse to showing my work, and this process has suggested to me that I should positively embrace that ethos. Anytime a new task is introduced, as a teacher I have responsibility to show how to perform these tasks. It's too easy to cut corners or save precious time by relying on students to interpret instructions for themselves, but in the end it's a false economy because you spend so much time cleaning up after yourself. The second is in some ways opposite to the first, and it is to constantly promote student independence. This doesn't mean casting them to the winds, rather it means helping them gain the confidence they need to determine, articulate, and to defend their own informed opinions, even when, or perhaps especially when, they run counter to the teachers. The overall goals of this book are ambitious, but that's suitable because the stakes are high and, as social studies teachers, we are well placed to make an important contribution to our students' future lives. As the authors write, inquiry fosters a greater appreciation of history and the literacy practices central to history, and do more to prepare students for the demands they will face as adults. Analyzing sources and constructing a written argument are skills that go beyond basic literacy practice or simple memorization. They rely on historical thinking. When students analyze historical sources, they ask critical questions. When students build arguments, they weigh the reliability of evidence. Social studies teachers are well suited to teaching literacy practices because such approaches are embedded in the study of historical topics and concepts. In other words, historical thinking is critical thinking, both in its approach and importance. I cannot recommend reading, thinking, and writing about history highly enough for the social studies classroom. It will improve your practice as it already has mine. Thank you for your time and for your attention.